Hi, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Tattoos as Personal Archives, a conversation between Tanari Twatagaloa and Terry Baxter, moderated by Adrian Story. I'm Allison Wyckoff. I'm the Director of Exhibitions for the San Francisco Public Library, and tonight's program is in conjunction with Living Tattoo Traditions, American Irizumi and Beyond, in the Maine's Jewett Gallery, also on this level. If you haven't seen the exhibition, please do so. It closes March 1st, so you have a couple of weeks to check that out before it leaves. There are two satellite exhibitions related to the show. One is Fashioning Bay Area Punk, Style, Subversion, and Shock, which pulls from the SF Punk Archive and is outside of the SF History Center on the 6th floor, and Inked Zodiac, The Art of Jimmy Shai in the Chinese Center on the 3rd floor. On February 19th, we host the last tattoo exhibition-related program, The Art and Business of Tattooing, which begins at 6 in the Latino Hispanic rooms, which are also on this floor. Check the website for more information about all of those things. Before we begin, I'd like to recognize that the San Francisco Public Library occupies the unceded ancestral homeland of the Ramaytush Ohlone peoples, who are the original inhabitants of the San Francisco Peninsula. We recognize that the Ramaytush Ohlone understand the interconnectedness of all things and have maintained harmony with nature for millennia. I would also like to uplift the work of the East Bay-based Sogorete Land Trust. The organization is led by Indigenous women who are working to restore sacred relationships between Indigenous people and their ancestral land, honoring matrilineal societies and in opposition to patriarchal violence and dynamics. Check out their website to see the important work that they're doing. I was thrilled when our moderator, City Archivist Adrian Story, proposed an exhibition-related program exploring community-driven archives and foregrounding tattoos as an aspect of that, and I'm honored to introduce her tonight. Adrian has held the role of City Archivist since September 2024. She brings deep experience in archives, records, and digital content management across academic, community, and institutional settings, with prior archives leadership roles at SF MoMA and the San Francisco Symphony, and extensive project work with the Karak tribe. Her work centers community access, inclusive cultural memory, and expanding how we define and preserve archives. Without further introduction, please help me welcome Adrian, Tanari, and Terry.
Is it on? Can you hear me? Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here. Just out of curiosity, how many archivists are in the room? Okay, quite a few. Welcome, welcome. So I'm excited. This is my first public program as a city archivist. I'm new to the role, and I'm glad that we are going to be able to talk about some of the things that I think about the most, that I love to think about when it comes to archives and cultural memory. So representation, the limitations of cultural heritage institutions, and cultural memory work that's led by communities, families, and individuals. I want to talk about how the program came to be and why Terry and Tanari, as part of our amazing exhibitions team's process in planning our central exhibitions in the Jewett Gallery. They ask librarians and archivists on staff for ideas for these kind of, programs and smaller exhibitions that can tie in. So when that call went out, I immediately thought of Terry and Libby Coiner, who's not with us today, but who's like with us, who's not with us and who's with us, and Tanari. So first, because Terry and Libby, both archivists, had presented about tattoos as personal archives, I think 2012, at the Society of American Archivists Conference. And that had really impacted me and really made me think differently about what an archive is. And So I thought of that and learned that that work had actually turned into this book recently published, Stories on Skin, A Librarian's Guide to Tattoos as Personal Archives. And Terry and Libby, together and individually, have also been, they both work at mainstream repositories. Terry will tell you more about that. But mainstream meaning, government or academic institutions, but have both done a lot of work around dissent in the profession and challenging the profession. So I thought of them, and I also, so then with Tanari, not just because Tanari has a lot of tattoos, although he does, but Tanari had talked about his family's cultural tattooing traditions and about participating in those coming up. And also we had some conversations about representation in mainstream institutions, and particularly Samoan Americans not being well represented in mainstream institutions. And that includes SFPL. When Tanari came in to do some research at the San Francisco History Center where I work, and we found together that we really don't have representation of Samoan American history in San Francisco, even though there is substantial history. So that's not unique to SFPL. That's a systemic issue. We're responsible for it, and it's connected to the fact that most mainstream and traditional institutions do not reflect their host communities. So with these two vantage points of archivist from, or two archivists, but the archivist from a mainstream institution and someone who's not well represented culturally in mainstream institutions, and both having this connection, deep connection to tattooing. I'm excited to talk about the role that tattooing plays in stewarding cultural and personal memory outside of the institution. So with that introduction of how the program came to be, Tanari and Terry are going to introduce themselves, and first will be Terry.
Great. And this is working, I'm assuming? Okay. And as a nervous presenter, I'm going in this introduction straight off a script. We'll talk normally later on, but that's just, it makes me feel way more comfortable, so that's what we're going to do. Good evening, friends. Before I get to introducing myself and my comrade Libby, I'd like to thank the San Francisco Public Library, especially my old friend Adrian Story, for inviting Tanari and me to chat with you about tattoos and archives. Being on this panel with smart, articulate friends both excites and humbles me. Hopefully I'll be able to keep up with them. Before I talk a little bit about myself, I'd like to introduce Libby Coiner-Sosi. She could not attend this panel, but is the co-author of Stories on Skin and has been a close friend and comrade for 20 years. I first met Libby in 2007 in Moscow, Idaho, that is. We were attending the annual meeting of the Northwest Archivists. She was a grad student in the University of BC's Archives program and doing an internship at the Multnomah County Library. Portland was a lively town at that time, and she loved the vibe. We hit it off, talked about archives, growing up religious, community, and tattoos. We continued these conversations, and 5 years later, we developed a proposal for the 2012 Society of American Archivists meeting in San Diego, titled Coloring Outside the Lines, Tattoos as Personal Archives. The presentation included Libby and me, as well as archives brainiacs Vern Harris and Stephanie Case. The session was a hit, and while its central theme that archives, or more precisely what archives do, is more expansive than things central to traditional Euro-American archives theory was not novel, the inclusion of tattoos as a means for the transmission of knowledge among generations was. Fast forward to 2019. I received an email from Jessica Gribble of ABC Clio, a library publishing house. She had heard about the presentation and wondered if I'd be willing to transform it into a book. I responded that I'd check with Libby, and as long as she was game, we'd be happy to do. Libby loved the idea. We put together a proposal and signed a contract in December 2019. Before we had a paragraph written, the world shut down, It wasn't until 2021 that we resumed writing and finished the manuscript in 2024. Libby is a treasured accomplice in breaking down the walls and barriers inherent in traditional work around the description and use of archives. I believe this springs from a heart that desires equity and unity among all human beings. Representation and autonomy are central to her work over the last 20 years. One of my favorite examples of her commitment is her work with other comrades to provide a platform for Spelman archivist Holly Smith to present her influential address, Radical Love, documenting underrepresented communities using principles of radical empathy in 2019. So let's raise a glass later to Libby and the impact she's had on providing real meaning to archives. We'll be discussing archives and tattoos in more detail in a little bit, so I'd like to use the rest of this time to introduce myself. I can't remember a time in my work as an archivist, which now stretches back over 40 years, when I did not see archives as connective. They connect us to our ancestors, to the human beings we share this world with, to future generations unseen, and to our own hearts. These connections provide context to archives and create and reveal the meaning behind them and their use. So a little context about me. I was born and lived my first 2 years in this city. 1214 Geary Boulevard is a quick 20-minute walk from here. I keep this on the down low most of the time. Oregonians have feelings about the land south of the 42nd. My folks were preparing for missions work, first in a remote logging community in Oregon, then in Malaysia. I moved with them in 1970 to Tanorada, Malaysia, and then to Penang. Growing up in a Christian boarding school was definitely a trip, but the introduction to a broader world in Oregon was a treasure. I came back to Oregon and lived with my grandparents for 3 years right out of high school. After a long 8 years of college, I became an archivist in 1985. My first wife and I raised 3 children. The oldest of them is 45 now. Archives as work became archives in practice, connecting to local communities first in Salem, Oregon, then Portland, Oregon. I became the archivist for the Oregon Country Fair in 2011 and have built community there in Eugene as well. I married Debbie Jewell in 2013, and we now have 13 kids and 7.75 grandkids, one coming in April. I carry and preserve the wisdom of my ancestors and try to transmit what is important to my children and grandchildren. To me, this is the heart of both archives and human beings.
One moment. Tanari needs a little clicker.
Hello, this is on, cool. My name's Tanari Tuatangaloa. I'm here as a tattooed person, but yeah, I've utilized tattoo to like really help form and solidify my identity, I believe. Like initially from just the music scene I was interested in, you know, like growing up listening to punk rock music and stuff, like just being tattooed was just like something you had to have, you know? It wasn't really until like adulthood where things started having more meaning and like having more connection to, and it's like helped me, especially with connecting with my Samoan culture. And yeah, I am in the process of preparing to be getting my malofi, which is the traditional Samoan tattoo, which I'll be getting this summer. I have photos of my parents here. If you want to see it before and after, they're in the back row. But yeah, like I said, I've like utilized tattoo to really help formulate my identity with being Chicano and being Samoan, and then also just being within the music punk scene, you know. Yeah, one of these photo on the far right is actually what I have tattooed on my neck as well. So really, Yeah, and the next one actually shows when a couple of my cousins received their pea, the Malofi Tatau, which was a really cool experience to be able to. This was my first time witnessing it happen. It is like a long process, taking about a week to do, and you do it kind of in 4-hour sessions. And at this time, there was a few of them getting it done at the same time, so they would rotate out. But it was really cool to be able to firsthand witness, and really helps prepare me for when I go through this and make me feel more comfortable and confident. But yeah, just showing like the different stages of me. And I love that middle photo of me. I think that's when I was like 9, 10, 11. Yes, yes. Just showing how all of these pieces of me are kind of like showcased within my identity and through tattoo. And I am a photographer. I work at SF MoMA doing a lot of art documentation and photographing exhibitions. And like Adrian said, like really noticing the gaps and lack of representation within institutions, and always trying to fight and vouch for more of that.
Okay. Thank you. And I want to just invite, as we get started in this conversation, think about questions. We're going to have time for question and answer at the end, and it will be really, really rich to hear, to dialogue with all of you. So we'll start with the question of, what does the phrase tattoos as personal archives mean to you? How does it relate to your work and life? And how do your own tattoos hold cultural, familial, or personal memory?
No. Okay, I'll go for it. I'd say all of my tattoos have personal meaning in the sense that, and I think this is, when I think about archives and modern archives, I think this is kind of central to the role of someone that is an interpreter in some ways. So an archivist and archives work together to kind of provide meaning to archives. And I think it's the same way with my tattoos. I mean, if people just look at them, they just sit there. And I have one of the ones I have. The second tattoo I got is on my left shoulder, and it's a tattoo of a gravestone from Boston. It has the phrase under it that says "Nacentus Morimor," which was kind of sitting there in a grocery store, and this little girl about the age of my oldest granddaughter, now about 11, was kind of staring at it, and then she said, "Hey, what's that mean?" And I think that's really a quick reason for having a tattoo in some ways, is that it is a way to interact, to bring connection, to get into conversation with somebody. So I said, "Well, it means born to die." And she kind of looks at me and said, "Why would somebody get that tattooed on their arm?" And I said, "Because we're all going to." And that line went quiet fast. But I think in a lot of ways that's one thing that tattoos do. Nobody knows what they mean until they ask you about it, so you have to talk about it and figure it out. And I have a whole bunch of tattoos that are also communal in the sense that they're tattoos done together or done with a specific reason to provide specific information that other people might know off the bat. So Libby and I have 3 frenzy tattoos, which you saw in the beginning there, which we've gotten in different contexts. One of them we got because she got serious cancer and had her ovaries fried, and so we got ovary-themed tattoos, and that was one thing we did. We're getting one, hopefully before SA in New Orleans this year, that's the theme of this one is ephemera, so hopefully you'll be able to see some ephemera tattoos. I also have tattoos related to the Archives Leadership Institute, one for each one where I attended as a cohort member, and 2 that I got for the different locations where it was held when I was part of the leadership group that did that. And it was an important thing to me, and so I got them, and other people can recognize immediately where they're from and what they're about. And I also have one with my that relates to my grandfather. He got a strange tattoo when he was in World War II, drunk, and wanted to make sure that my grandmother would get benefits, so he had his service number tattooed on his arm. So I have the same tattoo on my arm, but I had violets instead of stars to represent my grandmother. And now my son has the same tattoo. So we have now stretching information going back 80 years, and as long as my son can live for a little while, should go sometime into the future and continue that story on. And so all of those things in the sense of personal archives, I think kind of relate to the way that archives work, in that you have some things that are sort of familiar, but you have to have a way to have a conversation about them, have a way to relate to each other, and they are used to build connection between people so that you can understand some similarities, understand some differences, and understand what you have in common together. So that'd be kind of the way I'd think of it.
I mean, yeah, like, I think of it in a couple different ways. Like, in reference to the Malofi, like getting the Samoan tattoo, it's like literally keeping traditions alive and keeping the culture alive, you know, and being a walking archive of that culture, but also like other tattoos being just telling a story, you know, like every tattoo kind of tells a story, whether you have that intention initially, like you could think of something as a meaningless tattoo or just something you want at that moment, but it's also kind of a reminder of a time and place or like where you were at that point of life. And yeah, I just think it's always interesting hearing the idea behind people's tattoos or like hearing their stories, or like I know some people who travel a lot and every single place they go, they will get a tattoo there. So it's just like a way to sort of mark different events, activities, just so much of someone's life. But then I guess it's also a question, it's like, how do you relay all of that information and like keep that going, you know? It's like, how do we know this tattoo meant this to this person and so on?
I really hear the multi-generational link in both of your stories. I mean, that with your grandfather, that connection is, you know, profound, and then the generations that go with the cultural tattoos. Thank you for that. Okay, this question is for Terry, specific to the book. And one of the things I noticed about this book was that it was really, the subtitle is very specific. It's A Librarian's Guide to Tattoos as Personal Archives. So I'm curious, for one, why librarian specifically, like why that? And I also, you know, it seems very aligned with your work in challenging the profession. You're speaking to other professionals and inviting a conversation. So how do you see the book as part of your ongoing critique of archives, profession, and libraries? And how might understanding tattoos as personal archives help librarians challenge or disrupt systemic inequities within our institutions?
First question about librarians, that's kind of out of my control. I wish I had all the power in the world, but I have to work with editors, and this is a library publishing house, and so they wanted the advice to go to librarians, and yeah, it was part of a desire to increase archival presence in the library field, and so that was the cross connection there. So, but it really could be for anybody. It wouldn't have to be librarians. It could be engineers, could be teachers, could be whatever. So, but the idea of tattoos as a means of challenging established archives theory, I think, is meaningful. You know, archives are at their heart stories, and they're stories that people tell, institutions tell, groups tell, whatever. And for a long time, archives stories were told by a pretty constricted group of folks. When I started working in archives in 1985, our archives, state archives in Oregon, was geared towards serious researchers, whatever that means, serious researchers. but it also was filled with a lot of rules that would exclude folks, and it was couched in languages that weren't available to everybody out there. And the message that came concretely through my own work, but also through theory, was that archives were designed for a particular purpose. They're designed to represent evidence of activities that have happened, but the underlying message on that was activities undertaken by powerful institutions. And if you are trying to think about the history of archives and the relationship to the institutions that create them, you're thinking of power dynamics, and these power dynamics are designed to include some folks and exclude other folks. And so trying to figure out a way to tell a story that is inclusive, and not in kind of like a trite way, but is truly inclusive. The idea that all of our stories matter, that all of our lives matter, that we're in this thing together as human beings, means that you have to start figuring out other ways to tell stories. And initially thinking about tattoos, it didn't come to me, you know, in my first kind of, the early part of my career, I didn't really think of tattoos in that way. But I did think of other things, you know, that why are things like, why do archivists hate oral historians? I mean, they don't now, but when I came into the business, why do archivists hate oral historians? Oral historians have valuable information to tell. They have a story to tell. In some ways, it's a more important story. It's part of the heartfelt part of the story instead of the fact part of the story. And the two of them together can create a more complete narrative out there. But then I started to think other things. I mean, how many of you have seen High on the Hog, the TV show? Food is archives, recipes is archives. I mean, the fact that we want to exclude important stories, multi-generational stories, fights against the heart of archives. In my mind, the heart of archives, is really, how do we talk to dead people, and how do we tell their stories to people that have yet to come? And we want our ancestors didn't do this stuff for no reason. They thought things were important. They thought things were meaningful. They would make our lives valuable going forward, so they left information for us. We as archivists have to sift through that and say, yeah, this is still important. We need to keep this stuff. We need to move it on forward. But even more importantly, we need to use that information right now to fix things as they're happening. And so I came to see how tattoos could break down that narrative, because tattoos do all of these things. There's a portion of the book that kind of goes through this, but the standard things that are kind of like archives theory are totally represented in tattoos. They're just done in a different way. So if people can start to move away from their narrow conceptions of archives as a thing and move towards what archives do, which is to carry wisdom from our ancestors through us to our descendants, then you can see many other things that could be archives than just board minutes and correspondence and stuff like that that's coming from traditional places of narrow institutional power.
Thank you. Can see why Terry's been a longtime mentor, and thank you for the work you've done in challenging the profession. And I have thought about, I define archives as like communication across generations. So thank you for speaking to that. To Nari, so my question for you is, you know, we've talked about the impacts that you have felt around lack of representation in institutions, and simultaneously you have this very rich family tradition, cultural tradition that you are about to participate in. So how do these contrasting experiences, both the absences in mainstream institutions and the continuities in cultural practice, shape your understanding of tattoos as conduits of cultural knowledge?
I think it's just sort of like, I don't know, having to be loud about things and showing off, and also just sort of getting together with community more. I think always in my head, maybe just very punk, but it's like always been DIY in my head, you know? It's like if these institutions aren't going to showcase this culture, it's like, well, then let's just do something ourselves and create our own opportunities, platforms, events, showcasing whatever. And I think there definitely is sort of a revival of this, especially like within the diaspora of a lot of people continuing these traditions with tattoo, like not even just Samoan, but like even amongst like Maori people, like seeing people getting the moko now is just so cool to me, you know? It's just really like a fuck you to like modern society, or Western society. But yeah, I think it's just important to really not let that stop you, I guess, and like kind of doing your own research, or like kind of, if it's like something you want to see, like you can find the people to make it happen, you know? And like I still am in constant conversation with the institution I work at, like trying to showcase more Pacific Islander artists, but I'm also like meeting artists and seeing what we can do on our own and like what we can make happen. And yeah, especially with tattoo, I think in my dream world, it's like I would love to help it become even more accessible to people, you know, like whether that is like creating a fund so people don't have to stress about the financial aspect of it all, and just so this tradition can easily continue through the new next generations.
Thank you so much. Okay, so this is for both of you, and I invite you to talk to each other about this. So the book, and by the way, the book, we have 3 copies at the library. They're circulating, so please check it out. And now we know it's not just for librarians, it's for everybody. Okay, so, but one of the things that is in the book is the influence of colonization and religion on tattooing traditions. And I really hear, I just wanted to like reflect back on the aspect of the fuck you as part of archives and documentation, and how tattooing has become associated with dissent and counterculture and also cultural reclamation. So now, there was a time when not that many people had tattoos. It was a little more on the edges. But now it's getting increasingly mainstream. So how does its function as a record of belonging, resistance, or identity evolve as it becomes more mainstream? I mean, I'm a mom, a middle-aged mom, and I've got a few tattoos myself.
Do your kids have tattoos?
Not yet.
Soon. I think I'd push back on this, that tattoos are recently popular. Just in a kind of a broad and kind of a longer arc kind of way. Because in doing the research for the book, which was really interesting to me, because there was a lot of things I didn't know and still don't know, still learning about. But most of the world was tattooed up until a couple hundred years ago. Almost most parts of the world had vibrant tattoo cultures. And the only place in the world that didn't have vibrant tattoo cultures 200 or 300 years ago was Europe, where they'd been suppressed mostly by Christians. And what I would say is that tattoo cultures existed until imperial and colonial and missionary efforts came to most of the rest of the world and suppressed that, along with a lot of other things. And cultural aspects, so things like dance, language, religion, tattooing, are unifying. They're ways that cultures and communities can be solid with each other, that they can say, this is us, this is our thing. And it was definitely in the interest of imperial and colonial efforts, and usually fronted by missionaries, because religion's a great way to help suppress things and kind of pave the way for imperialists and colonials to come in, stomp these traditions out. And so what we see as a traditional or as a revival in tattoos is mostly a Western revival that happened when sailors came to the to the Polynesian areas and said, hey, this is fun, why don't we get some tattoos? We'll get some tattoos like these folks have. And so suppressing them abroad while still bringing them in as a cultural thing in Western society. And so in some ways, the tattoo culture in the United States and Europe anyway is an oppressive culture. I wouldn't say completely. I think that most of that stuff is done kind of most of it's not done intentionally. People don't think about it, I don't think. And so what we see is like the punk rock culture, the biker culture, the cultures that brought tattoos here were really rebelling against the same kinds of oppressive forces that had oppressed folks around the world to remove tattoo culture. I think now there's an opportunity, though, for revitalization, and that's what excites me a lot, because I think what it is in an indigenous sense, and by indigenous I mean not just American indigenous, but indigenous around the world, is the revitalization of tattooing processes are tied directly with the revitalization of traditional cultures. And really, again, to echo Tanari's fuck you, it's not fuck you in necessarily a bad way. It's not saying I want to fight you. It's saying you can't control me. I have sovereignty, I have autonomy. I can be my own person, do my own thing, and you can't tell me I can't. And I think that's a really powerful thing in the entire world. But I think it's a positive thing. And when people in positions of power realize that we could share that and that we could all have autonomy and we could all do our own thing, then we've created a place where we can create a world where we are peaceful with each other instead of fighting each other. And so I'm really excited about the idea of cultural revitalization as a sense of not just cultural pride, but of cultural power and individual power. Power as an individual within a community to build yourself the way you want to build yourself in harmony with other people doing the same thing.
Yeah, and I was just kind of thinking about too, just sort of the contradiction of it all, I guess, because a lot of these traditions being sort of pushed back with the influx of religion and everything, but then like now you see everyone with like a cross tattoo or something, and even me, I have the Virgin Mary tattooed on my stomach, but that's like less of a connection to me to religion, but more to like Chicano culture, you know? But that's also just weird situations and connections to it all. But I think it's also interesting seeing how tattoo evolves, and as it becomes more mainstream and stuff, it just also seeing sort of the styles of tattoos people get. And like now I really am under this idea is like there's no such thing as a bad tattoo, you know, like especially with the rise of like ignorant style tattoos, it just looks like something someone just scribbled or just drew, you know, like, but it looks cool, and you know, you can make anything look cool, I believe. But yeah, I don't know if it also goes in, I also think of like people removing tattoos. That's a whole other subject as well that we've kind of talked about. But I'm personally against removing tattoos because I think everything sort of tells a story. Yes, I have tattoos that I regret getting, but it kind of is a reminder of who I was at that point in time. Again, being a personal archive. But everyone gets tattoos for a different reason, you know, and there could be more major reasons of why someone may want something removed, and maybe they don't want to remember that part of themselves, or it just doesn't fit their current aesthetic.
Yeah, that was a thing in the research that surprised me. One of the things that surprised me the most is that the amount of money spent on tattoo removal now equals the amount of money on getting tattoos. Although, because it costs a lot more to remove one than to get one, there's still more tattoos. But it surprised me that tattoo removal is such a big thing, and they've actually developed some ways to do permanent ink that can be removed with a single pass. I'm interested what you think about like appropriative tattoos. So if there's no bad tattoo, what about an appropriative tattoo?
Okay, well, I don't know.
Just don't want to put you on the spot. Just asking.
I mean, to each their own.
Yeah.
I may be silently judging to myself sometimes. Sometimes I'll see someone with a Polynesian tattoo. I'm like, oh my gosh, are you Polynesian? And they're like, no, like my friend is, and they gave it to me. I'm like,
Mike Tyson.
but obviously, tribal tattoos was a big trend and is a trend again in a new way. But I don't know. I guess it just really depends on that person's reasoning or intentions. But not to say that I won't judge you for it.
Yeah, it's funny in doing some research, I read about who owns native culture, and one of the things that he mentioned in that book, which I found really important for a lot of things, but also for tattoos, is that there's no real way to kind of police this stuff. You can't. You really have to rely on people taking an ethical stance on this. And when they did the Inuit renewal tattoos, a woman there in the mid-2000s took it upon herself to basically revitalize Inuit tattooing. There's no traditionally tattooed person left, and there are now 80 or 90 that she's tattooed most of them. And one of the things that she said is, you want to get these kind of tattoos, maybe you could just wait a little bit. Let our women have these tattoos, let them relish the fact that they're revitalizing their culture. Wait, even if you get an elder-approved tattoo, just wait. Just take some time. You don't have to get one right away. And I thought that was kind of like, not so much bossy behavior, but just kind of good wise advice to think about things like that. I thought about a couple tattoos that I haven't gotten just because I thought that in my mind, even if they weren't appropriative, they felt kind of appropriative in my mind, so I just didn't get them. And so, but that's a personal choice, and I really get what you're saying here, and that is that people have to make their own decisions about this stuff, and I think that just being aware and cognizant of other cultures and the way other people do things, you can probably make, if you think about things and are kind of honest with yourself, you can make good decisions about that sort of thing.
Yeah, and also everything now is also very contemporary, and referential. So it's like they may be inspired by something, but they may not. Yeah, like again, it's intentions. As long as I'm not seeing them get like traditional tap, like Malofi, but also who's to say, because people are varying degrees of Samoan or whatever in your bloodline, and just because you're less percentage than someone else doesn't mean like you're not it. So again, that's where it's like, I don't know. I'm not the one to police them on that.
Are you getting a tap tattoo or are you getting a modern instrument tattoo?
No, tap.
Ooh.
This also makes me think from how our relationship to tattooing reflects and kind of documents this cultural context of part of what you're describing, and the concept of appropriative tattoos also makes me think of a lot of people don't have a clear connection to their identity or cultural traditions, you know, where that's been cut off and where there may be a searching of tattooing as a way of like trying to define that identity too, even if it's not clear. Anything more on that?
Well, I was just going to say that, you know, thinking about the archives component of this is when I've thought about this, and I actually used it as part of the narrative in the book, was the protocols for Native American archives are a method of looking at things aside from power dynamics and looking at things, kind of being honest with each other and saying, hey, what's this mean to you? And I think the same kind of appropriative stuff that could happen with tattoos happens with other things out there, with archives that are out there, and people use them when they probably shouldn't use them for different things. And that using something like the protocols as a basis for the way that you think about things and approach things and talk with other people about things is kind of a useful way of coming to a good decision.
Yeah, thank you for tying that in. For those of you who don't know, the protocols for Native American archival materials were, are really speaking about, I guess, reminding archivists, professional archivists, that not everything is Western, and that not everything is to be accessible to everyone, and that not everything is to even be preserved, and that those decisions aren't just for archivists to make. So thank you for bringing that in. Let's talk about pain. So tattooing does have an aspect of pain to it, and archives, documents, there's a lot of pain documented in archives, and one of the important conversations among cultural memory workers is around how people encounter pain in archival materials. From the archivists' exposure to that, and how to care for archivists that are dealing with potentially traumatic materials, how the subjects of the archives experience that and are impacted by that, and how researchers are impacted by that. So that's an important conversation, and I'm curious about your thoughts about the role that tattooing plays in documenting, processing, and or healing personal or intergenerational pain.
Well, I mean, personally, it's like tattoo has always been sort of a coping mechanism sometimes. Like, when I've been at my lowest points in my life, I'm like, let's go get a tattoo. And maybe to boost my spirits, but then also kind of working through whatever it is that I may be going through. And also, tattoo is like a way to memorialize people who I've lost, like going through situations like that, even in the midst of it, talking with people, it's like, should we get a tattoo? What tattoo should we get to like really, I don't know, memorialize this person? Or even, I'm about to be 7 years sober next year. And even getting a tattoo to sort of memorialize that and just sort of, I don't know, it's not yes, there was a lot of fun times drinking, but there also was a lot of painful experiences, and like keeping a record of that through tattoo, I guess, is something that I'm interested in. But like I said, yeah, it's just like always been a method of working through whatever life is throwing at me at that time.
Yeah, I don't think the tattoos really hurt that much themselves, but I think that there's a lot of representation. I'm just speaking for myself. This tapping tattoo thing, that doesn't sound like it's going to be, that great. So, but I was thinking about one of the things that I really appreciated about putting this book together is we put out a call to archivists and memory workers and just said, hey, if you want to be included in this book, send us a picture, send us your story. And 25, I think it ended up being, including Libby and me, 29 memory workers provided stories. One of them was Mark Shellstad. He's an archivist that I've known for a long time, and his son committed suicide at age 21, and he got 3 tattoos to memorialize that. And one of the tattoos includes ashes from his son's cremation. And when he tells the story, he's a pretty matter-of-fact guy, but you can tell because of the placement. Number one, the tattoos are in a place where he can see them all the time. He can look at them, and he says it is comforting for him to think about. 2 of the tattoos relate to things that he did with his son, outdoor things, and he can look at those every day, and he can see them and as tangible physical representations of somebody that is no longer with him in body, but is with him in spirit, and they can do things together. And I think that that's a really profound way of looking at how that kind of personal record provides comfort to him, kind of allows him to move on with his life. I have another friend, his name's Jarrett Lee Miller, and he is the digital archivist for Cherokee Nation and served in the Army in Afghanistan and Iraq. And coming back after that experience, he has used cultural revitalization to connect to his Cherokee culture, and part of that is traditional tattooing. So he has a series of traditional tattoos, increasingly all covering his entire body. The ones that people notice right off the bat, he has a bunch of facial tattoos, but he has just a lot of traditional tattoos. And the whole process of doing it, both the pain, the physical pain of doing it, but also the kind of connective nature of seeing his past, kind of creating a cultural connection that he didn't really have much of until he purposefully built that connection, has really opened him up and has really eased the PTSD that he'd kind of gained from all of that time in Afghanistan and Iraq. And I think that his story is a really powerful one about how traditions can have a hiatus, but they don't have to be gone forever, that you can rebuild something that has long roots and build it back and purposefully create this long arc of history and of community that didn't exist before that and can now exist with his children and their children. So in talking with him about it, I think it's a real profound healing kind of pain for him to work through his life.
Anything else on that? It's okay. Okay. I guess I am curious about like that moment. I think the moment of what you described, Tanari, of like things are rough, let me get a tattoo. Or, I know that, I started getting tattoos during my divorce. So that was a painful experience, but it's in like, when you think about those times of like, in this moment, I want to get a tattoo, like, what does that do for you? Is the topic of the is it what the tattoo symbolizes, or is it the process too of getting more ink?
I think it's kind of both. Like, one, like what it is that I am getting tattooed at that moment, but then also the actual physical pain of getting the tattoo is like maybe something to help distract you, from whatever, and just, it's almost like therapeutic as well, depending, obviously varying degrees of pain. But yeah, it's helpful in that way, I think.
Thank you. I hope everyone's thinking of questions because we're coming to that time. But you had mentioned, Tanari, having some tattoos that you regret, and that but you stick by them. You stick by them. But I wanted to talk a little bit more about that and the idea of, tattoos are permanent, sort of, although we know we can remove tattoos now. But there is the concept is a permanent mark on a body. Bodies are not permanent. And cultural contexts are always changing. And our life context, like that part of, you're saying like that part of yourself, a version of yourself that's an earlier version. And archives in this, like, communicating across generations are a way to connect with cultural contexts that have changed. So thinking about all of that, the like permanence, the impermanence of all of that, I want to hear more about the tattoos that you regret, tattoos that no longer resonate, and what it's like to live with marks that do reflect earlier versions of yourself. What does it mean to you, or how does it serve you in the present to have that?
Well, the tattoos I have in mind were tattoos that were done by a friend who is not a tattoo artist. I just bought a tattoo kit from a smoke shop, and I got them one when I was 16 and one when I was 18, just in our apartment because we were bored. But like I have one on my leg, and it isn't the best looking and kind of is not centered and kind of throws off. I feel like if I get anything else, or it's like, what do I get to really blend this out? But it's like eventually I'll be covered and it'll just be another thing that's there. And it is a reminder of just those times being bored at home with my roommates. And I guess the funniest one is my first tattoo. I got the inside of my lip tattooed, and everyone's else faded within a week or a month. Mine is still there. more than 15 years later. And it says Thuglicious. And that is just a fun memory of being a dumb teenager. My friend's second tattoo he's ever done, and it's stuck for all these years.
That's amazing.
It's a great story, and not everyone gets to see it, and maybe that's a great thing. I don't share it with everyone. But whenever I decide to get my lip re-pierced, it's always the piercer who gets to see it. But the T is actually kind of faded away, so now it kind of mostly just says Huglicious. Maybe I should learn to become more of a hugger to embrace that.
Yeah, the evolution. The tattoo is helping you evolve as a person. It's amazing.
Yeah, I think I'll always think of you now as Thuglicious. But yeah, I don't have any tattoos that I regret really. I have some that I didn't take care of them very well, so they're a mess. But I still like them. They're I'm okay with them. I was interested in your thought about the permanence though, because you know that in every state in the United States except for Washington, you can send your tattooed skin to a company and they will prepare it and frame it so that you can preserve it in perpetuity. So now my children have a different kind of gift that they're going to get. They won't get an inheritance that they were expecting. They'll get a different kind of inheritance. But yeah, I have thought about that in thinking about tattoos. The fact that they are permanent for a time period, but they're not permanent forever. In many ways, that's a lot like archives, which are also continually revisited to see if they have value, to see if they're going to be used through time. But also the fact that you can tell a story through time. And I think Tanari's tattoo that's coming up is really something that kind of follows a lot of traditions where you're just continuing your chunk in a long chain of storytelling, and the story is permanent. Your little piece of it might not be, but the story is permanent. And so you're providing, like in a lot of ways that we transfer information through time, you're just doing your job. You're doing your link in the chain, and the information continues on as long as you do your part. And so I think that doing your part's an important thing in making sure that information goes through time, permanent beyond just your own life.
What are some of your earliest tattoos, and do you still resonate with them?
I have an old a skull and crossbones that says, let's see, what is it? Work, play, sleep, dream. I like that. That's the first one that I got. Second one I got is the one from my grandpa. Then I got the one up here, Born to Die. But yeah, I mean, I've just gotten them over time, and I like them all. They're like your kids. I mean, you can't just not like them, right? I mean, you got them. You got to like them. So, did you want me to not like one of them? Because
No.
If you want me to not like one of them,
I want you to like them all. So I started getting tattoos when I was 40, and
me too.
well, maybe that's part of it. Maybe you regret it less when you're older, when you start getting them. But I do think about if I had started getting tattoos when I was younger, what that would look like what that archive would be. It definitely would have some Grateful Dead bears on my lower back. Maybe, so I'm grateful I didn't get those. So there's
Fucking
also the
hippies.
So I have reflected on that. That was my last question. So Allison is going to bring the mic around, and I certainly hope that some of you have some questions.
I could probably just talk normal. But Hello, is this on? Okay, hi. My name's JoJo. I'm an archivist also, and I have many tattoos as well. This has always been a topic I've been interested in. But something I haven't heard much about is the role of tattoo artists. And I'm thinking about if, I wrote down some notes, thinking about tattoos as personal archives, as archival records, what role does the tattoo artist have in that?
I think it depends. It's contextual, as an archivist would say. But, I can speak personally in that I have some tattoos that I just went into a tattoo shop, got them, don't know the artist's name, they just did them, and I moved on. I would say probably I've gotten the last 7 or 8 tattoos that I've gotten at the same shop, and I've gotten them for reasons because I like the artist and I know the artist. So I think that for me, and I can only speak for myself, and I can sort of, like when I talk with Libby about hers, she has, I don't know how many tattoos on her body, but all but just a few of them are done by the same artist out of Portland, and she's really connects particularly with this artist. And so I think there are people in that realm, and that there's probably at the other end of the spectrum where people just don't care and they just go to a shop, get a tattoo, and don't know any of the artists that did it. That would be my feeling, but that's my personal thought on that.
And I mean, there's also artists, like you said, it depends on context and depends on the artist, but it's like, I know so many artists, so many tattoo artists kind of documenting even their illustrations and like, yes, with Flash, but then like creating those into books or like keeping record of like all of those sort of things. So that's just like one way they're participating in this archive of it all.
Had who the artist is been part of your tattoo experience? Like, how does that play a role in your tattoos of who the artist was?
A lot of when I got tattooed, it was just about what I wanted to get tattooed, not necessarily the artist I was getting tattooed by. So yeah.
I would have liked to gotten tattooed by Sailor Jerry. That would have been fun.
Hello, I'm Eddie. I'm a journalist in the city, and I do not have any tattoos, but I'm very curious. I grew up in Hawaii, so the idea of tattoo as important cultural symbol about your mo'olelo, like your folk story, your ancestry, that's like seems to me like one side of the spectrum. And on the other side of the spectrum, I think of like a kid who got blackout drunk in Fort Lauderdale and ended up with like a SpongeBob holding a bong on his calf. And like a lot of this conversation has been legitimizing every kind of tattoo as a point in time, as a context for your life. But as researchers, as thinkers, how do you relate the two? Because one seems very rooted in a communalist view of tattooing, and another is very individualist, or to some observers, nonsensical. Like, so do these things interrelate? Because it sounds like they do, but how do you parse that difference? Because it seems to be about philosophy.
So you're saying SpongeBob is not important? Well, I guess, and again, this personal observation here, I would say that we academically tend to gatekeep what's important and what's not important. So we say, hey, you're a smart guy, you went to college, you're a smart gal, you went to college. You know, you've got good things to say. And we tend to move that up the ladder of what's important and move other things down the ladder. So what I would say is that all of us human beings have an important story to tell, and that the work of using tattoos or other things to break down those barriers, to say that we're not going to have a caste system of importance here in our stories. Our stories are all important. And I get your point, though. I mean, it's.
I just want to clarify. I don't think it's about importance. I think it's about do you see a difference between a philosophical difference between tattooing that is rooted in tradition, in like it would be.
Yes.
I would have no familial history in order to get like a mummy. Like it would not be relevant to me, even though I know there's a judgment about appropriation and all that. I'm just like, are these two different ways of thinking about tattoos, or are they more interrelated than it seems to be?
Yeah, thanks. I mistook the question completely at the beginning. Yeah, I do think that there's different ways of looking at that, and I think that, you know, in some ways, I mean, if you went through the iterations of thinking about Web 1.0, 2.0, 3.0, you could look at tattooing in a similar way, which is that tattoos that are done traditionally, that come out of a traditional culture, that have been done through time, multi-generational tattooing traditions, people can see that right off the bat. I mean, you want to look at a Russian mobster, you can look at his tattoos, you know what they mean. You want to look at a Maori person, you can look at those tattoos. They have a meaning that's observable for anybody. So modern tattooing in the United States, which is what we focused on in the book and which is probably the area that I feel most familiar with, is much less like that. And it really requires somebody to stand between the tattoo and the person looking at it to provide an explanation for them. So yeah, they're different philosophies. And you know, my point was that they're equally important philosophies, but you're right. I think that there are different ways of looking at tattooing, and you know, maybe at some point that'll merge. I mean, a lot of the things that came out of American traditional style now have meaning that has a kind of a uniform meaning that's lasted for 60 or 70 years. So you can see perhaps that will develop over time with a different sort of tattoos, in much the same way that kind of cultures that, in a lot of ways insular, you know, cultures that really built something with a standard group of people through time that didn't have a lot of influence to change that. Whereas here you've got this weird SpongeBob mix where everybody's doing stuff.
I mean, me personally, I just think it's all important to sort of like document, you know, or like keep record of, because as I think of someone like myself, you know, having a mix of those two very things, you know, like I think in the future, them discovering my body and like, why does he have this with that, you know, like a little Nintendo
Buglicious.
character with this traditional like Samoan tattoo. But I think it just is sort of documenting what the current people today like are getting in. I don't know, because it's like varies so much across the board. It's always interesting to me just to see like what is happening now in this time period.
Hi, I'm Tanari's mother. I just wanted to bring up, we were talking about how tattoos are more accepted now. I'm a nurse, and back in the day, you could not have any tattoos. It was more associated as being a gangster, a biker, anything like that. And as the years progressed, they were allowed, but you had to cover them with makeup or with sleeves because you had to look professional caring for these people that are ill. And now you don't need anything to cover them. You can show them, you wear them with your scrubs. The scrubs are usually short. Lots of women and men have tattoos, and they're caring for these patients professionally. And it's come about because I think that more people are getting tattoos and becoming nurses or whatever your profession is. And so they had to find some sort of happy medium, so they just kind of stopped making them cover them, and they're more acceptable now. And, you know, the younger generation is coming out with lots of tattoos on their necks, on their arms, everywhere. So it is more acceptable. One thing I wanted to say also is Chinari has a tattoo on his neck. And a few years ago, I was visiting my sister in Hawaii for my birthday. And I remember we were at Costco, and I get these texts from him. And I look, and it's me on his neck. He's getting it tattooed. And I'm going, oh my God, oh my God. I couldn't stop saying that. My sister's like, what? I said, look at what Chinari did. And she said, don't be upset with him. I said, I'm not upset, I'm just in shock. She goes, this is how he expresses himself, and it just shows you how much he loves his mom. So I thought that was sweet.
That is sweet.
I'm the better Tenari. Real quick, the Samoan tattoos, usually we research, and there's a couple families that's they've been doing it, the whole family has been doing it for so long that we actually look out for those families that do our tattoos and everything. I can't believe about that lip. Well, I do, but I didn't know what it said. The same thing is in the Samoan, a lot of the old school Samoans, they get bent out of shape, a non-Polynesian with our pia. Me personally, as long as you don't disrespect our culture, I don't have a problem. But a lot of the old people, they have a problem, a non-Polynesian, having our traditional tattoos.
I have a problem with it. But I mean, it's funny too, what my mom was saying too, because it's funny how even her perception of tattoos has changed, because she's even told me, it's like, I don't care if you get a tattoo, just don't get on your face. And then recently I was like, you know what, I'm thinking about getting a face tattoo soon. And she didn't even like bat an eye. It was just so normal. She's like, all right, go for it.
Okay. My question is actually to the dad. My son is a tattoo artist. Yeah, and I worked for the hospital for 27 years, and I remember that. Like you can have a tattoo. But I always wondered if someone, I don't know, I would be kind of worried if someone wasn't familiar with the spirit and tradition of certain tattoos. I wouldn't want that. I'm not trying to be prejudiced, but just, I feel the same way.
My opinion, my son has the same idea that, we don't have a problem with somebody doing it, as long as they're not disrespecting us. So I don't have a problem.
Well, it's not so much someone else getting, but it's like, I'm thinking like my son is a tattoo artist.
Yeah.
If your son walked into his shop and asked him to do that, I would tell my son no, because if you mess up,
Well, there's a lot of tattoo shops out there that are offering Polynesian tattoos. Problem is, each nationality, our tattoos are different.
okay, I just want to know.
I definitely do think, like, as a tattoo artist, you do have some responsibility, to say yes or no to certain things, not just doing whatever someone says just because they're going to pay you.
Yeah, I had a quick question for Chinari about, you talked about how, you've got like a Nintendo character, and then now you said you were working towards getting, this very traditional, ritualist, there's a ritual around getting this tattoo. So I just wanted to know, was there a point in your history with tattoos that you had sort of a switch to cultural tattoos, or is it sort of always been both things? It could always be one or the other. And if there was a moment at which it switched, was there a tattoo to mark that occasion?
Well, I mean, in the past, when I was younger, I always thought I would get something sort of referential to it. because I think also just being multicultural, just having my own identity issues, I'm like, am I Samoan enough? You know, it's like, am I enough of whatever? I think it's kind of when I've came, I don't know, just really solidified that it's like, because I am Samoan enough, you know? I think that was sort of the thing that switched for me too, you know? And it's like also just having this interest in tattoo already and then having this sort of special cultural tradition tied to it. It's like, why wouldn't I just go all the way and participate in this, you know? And even just bring me closer to my Samoan culture. So that was really the thinking behind that, you know, which was also hard, like intentionally not getting anything on my legs, because it's a great place to get a tattoo. But yeah, it's definitely also opened me up more to more traditional methods of tattooing, like this one will be tapped, but also just even getting a stick and poke. I've never gone a stick and poke, but even just how, even within Filipino culture, how they do things. But I think there's also just been more of interest across the board, you know. People are looking more into sort of more indigenous, traditional ways of tattoo.
Hey there. I had a question about visibility of your tattoos. Just personally, when I first started getting tattoos, I was getting them in locations that were more personal and only visible to me. But over time, I started to feel more comfortable kind of sharing my tattoos and getting them in places that are a little more visible to have conversations about it. I'm just wondering, what was your relationship with your tattoos? Have you always felt like you wanted to have conversations about it, or has that changed over time?
The only tattoo I can't see is the big one on my back, and the only reason it's there is because there's no space to put it in a visible location, so that's why it's there. But I've always liked them kind of where I can see them. I want to be able to see it myself, but I also have been really okay with other people seeing it because I think it's a good conversation starter, and it's also kind of just a little poke. When I first started getting them, it's just a little poke at folks, you know, like, yeah, it's there. Look at it. You know, and I think there is something to that. So, but I know that in the book here, Libby talked quite a bit about issues around professionalism, and I think it gets to your mom's thoughts there about, you know, initially having tattoos, having them covered up, and she writes pretty provocatively about the gatekeeping nature of a lot of employers in the sense of, you know, what you can wear, how your hair can look, what jewelry you can wear, all these kinds of things that have no real impact on whether you can do a job or not, but they're a sense of reinforcing professional culture. And so I think that, you know, I think you're right on in your kind of observation that people will hide their tattoos and they will cover them up for a job interview, for other things like that. And so, I think having tattoos and making them visible fights back against that culture, and having somebody that's, I'm not a professional archivist, but I'm a working archivist. You know, I can say, I'll tell you, I had a role as a committee member, committee chair and I had to give a report in an annual meeting, and so I gave this report there, and this woman came up to me after that and she said, you know, I've covered up my tattoos at the last 5 conferences I've come to, and then I see somebody up there flailing their arms around covered with tattoos. I'm not covering mine up next time. And I think that everybody that's willing to put their tattoos out there and say, hey, take a look at this, it's okay, help somebody else do the same thing if they want to. I mean, if you want to have them private, that's cool too. But if you want to have tattoos out there and you feel embarrassed or scared to do it, I think having solidarity with folks that have them out there is a good thing.
Just to add on to that, it's like, I've never really thought about the visibility of my tattoos. I've just always gone like, this is what I want, this is where I want it. Yes, it brings up conversation and when you have them more visible places, and sometimes that's not my intention at all. I'm like, please don't ask me about this tattoo. But I don't know, as I think I've become more welcoming to conversations with strangers as I've gotten older. But also when it comes to sort of some kind of separate but similar, when it comes to professionalism, like for me, I've like always, I refuse to compromise like myself for a job or whatever it is, which has at times made finding a job harder. And obviously, I'm in a privileged place to be able to do so. But I don't know. I don't think people should stress out about like a tattoo preventing them from living a certain type of life, you know? Yes, you may stick out, and I feel like at times I've had to like work even harder to prove myself. Like just because I have a tattoo doesn't mean I'm less than. So I'm trying to always go above and beyond and exceed expectations just to really prove my point that I'm just as capable as anyone else.
Okay, last question.
Hello. I'm especially interested in ephemerality and intangible cultural heritage. So can you speak as a photographer and an archivist about documenting tattoos so that they can be shared intergenerationally? And then how do you capture the stories and the context, which has been kind of an undercurrent here, to the imagery so that it can be shared as people have passed?
I mean, I think this show does a great way of doing that, just by photographing these people and kind of being able to hear their stories, both the artists and the people being tattooed, you know. Me being biased as a photographer, I think it's great to photograph everything, and like even I think everyone should own a camera and document their own personal life perspectives, but then that is also like maybe documenting your tattoos and passing those stories along so there's more of an understanding in the future.
Yeah, I'd agree. I mean, I think the show is a really positive way to do that. You know, in the book, we captured stories and tattoos of different folks. I think ephemera in general is something that has been looked down on by archivists for a long time, and the different ways of collecting, even something like people that are collecting like handbills for rock shows or all sorts of different things out there that traditionally have been seen as not serious enough to document human life, but they're obviously a key point to human life. So, and I think Tanari's point's correct. Unless you're gonna, get yourself flayed and preserve that skin for somebody else, pictures are the way to do it. I mean, you're gonna do it through different photographic means. And I think just in doing research for the book, there's a lot of stuff out there that is documenting that. And there's a few things that I would say, just as with any ephemera, you want to take into mind is some people don't want to be documented. So you have to think about that as part of your equation, whether you want to do it anyway or whether you want to exclude people that don't want to be in there. And then I think there's a serious potential for surveillance technology using tattoos, which I think is really, it's not new. I mean, you go back to old, mugshots and cards and things like that. Those were capturing tattoos. It's just that when you do it in a database, you can do it a lot faster and a lot more uniformly across populations. So in capturing ephemera, those would be two things that I would think about. But I think you're right on in that ephemera in general, if you want to have the true story of human life, you want to get all parts of it, and ephemera is a big part of human life. So figuring out a way to do that documentation is important.
We're at time, right? But I'll just add to that because you reminded me of something when I was working with the Kuduk tribe. A lot of and it's very common in Western culture to just look at the thing, like the thing is the object, etc. But that there we did documentation of people holding the thing, say it's a basket or something, and or even painting, and telling the story, so that it was together. That thing doesn't exist without the story. And so I think that's another aspect. I mean, of course, gets into how hard it is to hold on to moving image, all of that. But that's a whole other conversation. So next program. I thank you all so much for joining us in this conversation. Thank you, Terry, for coming down from Portland. Thank you, Tanari. Thank you both for sharing such personal parts of yourselves.